One of these movies was so bad the star refused to even say its name in public. Another one ended a director's career. And the funny part is, every one of these box office disasters started with the exact same mistake: paying a ton of money to its actors. In 1993, writer-director John Lee Hancock writes a screenplay about two detectives investigating serial murders in early 90s Los Angeles. Various names get attached over the years, but nothing ever happens with it. The script just sits there in development hell for 26 years. Finally, in 2019, somebody digs it up and they decide to actually make it. They pay Denzel Washington $40 million to star alongside Rami Malek and Jared Leto. Serious movie, serious director, serious cast. They wrap filming in December 2019. Then the pandemic hits and Warner Brothers puts everything on hold while studios try to figure out what to do. In 2021, as things started opening back up, Warner made a decision to release their entire slate simultaneously in theaters and on HBO Max. They were betting everything on their streaming service. This strategy pissed off Christopher Nolan so much that he said "F it" and left Warner for Universal, which turned out to be a smart move on his part. John Lee Hancock didn't have Nolan's clout, so he had to go along with Warner's plan. The Little Things came out January 29, 2021, same day in theaters and on HBO Max. If this had been an event movie, maybe people would have gone to theaters. But it was a neo-noir psychological crime thriller, exactly the kind of thing you can watch at home. So people did. Denzel got praised for his performance, the script was considered weak, and the movie made $30.1 million total. Denzel Washington made $40 just for doing it. After that, John Lee Hancock made one more movie for Netflix in 2022. Since then, he hasn't made anything. Same year, same studio, same strategy. Will Smith used to be a guaranteed box office draw back in the day, but by the 2020s, that wasn't really true anymore. Warner either didn't realize this or didn't care because they paid him $40 million to star in King Richard. This one is a biographical sports drama where Smith plays Richard Williams, the father and coach of Venus and Serena Williams. The movie was classic Oscar bait, inspirational sports biopic about a coach with an unconventional training strategy that worked. And it actually was good. Critics loved it, people loved it. It still got a 98% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes 5 years later. Someone called it an inspiring lesson on how to be an American. The film got 6 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, and Will Smith won Best Actor. He basically proved he still had it. But Warner released it the exact same way they released The Little Things, simultaneously in theaters and on HBO Max. This was late 2021, still technically pandemic times, and if you could watch the movie at home, you were going to watch it at home. They opened it super wide in 3,250 theaters, but it made only $39.4 million against its $50 million budget. Will Smith got paid $40. If they'd just done a normal theatrical release, this probably would have been a legitimate hit. Good inspirational sports story, Oscar-winning performance, great reviews, audiences clearly loved it. But Warner's streaming strategy killed it along with pretty much everything else they put out that year. In the late 90s, Eddie Murphy could do whatever he wanted. The Nutty Professor was a massive hit. Dr. Dolittle was a massive hit, and studios were desperate to work with him. Warner had this project sitting around since the 80s, some sci-fi comedy that they'd never gotten off the ground. They offered Eddie $20 million to star in it even though they still hadn't finished the script. Eddie signed on. The director, Ron Underwood, figured they had time to fix everything because Eddie was booked for the next 7 or 9 months anyway. So they started bringing in writers. Except Eddie kept rejecting the scripts. They'd bring in a new writer, Eddie would say no. Another writer, another rejection. Underwood kept trying. At one point, Eddie just told him to play the whole thing straight and he'd make it funny through his performance. Underwood was a fairly new director and Eddie Murphy was the biggest star in Hollywood at that point. Underwood couldn't push back. He admitted later that maybe they should have just stopped when Eddie kept rejecting everything, but they didn't. They kept going. What they ended up with was this weird, half-baked thing about a nightclub owner on the moon in 2087 who refuses to sell his club to the lunar mob. The test screenings were so disastrous that Warner pulled the movie from its release date in April 2001. Then they spent $20 million on reshoots. The budget ballooned to $100 million. It still wasn't good. Warner pushed the release all the way to August 2002. Eddie Murphy flat out refused to do any publicity for it. The movie opened in 2,320 theaters and made $2.1 million. That was literally the worst opening on record. It ended up with $7 million total against a $100 million budget, plus another 20 to 30 in marketing. Eddie Murphy made $20 million out of that disaster. Martin Brest had one hell of a career. He made Beverly Hills Cop with Eddie Murphy, Midnight Run with De Niro, Scent of a Woman with Al Pacino. He was an Oscar nominee, one of the most respected directors working in the 80s and 90s. Then he made one flop and that was it. His career just ended. Here's what happened. Brest shot a crime movie with comedy elements starring Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez. They wrapped filming in early 2002 and it was supposed to be this straightforward crime flick. But then Ben and Jennifer started dating in real life and suddenly they were the biggest story in tabloids. The studio looked at the test screenings, which weren't good, and looked at all the tabloid coverage and had an idea. They told Brest to reshoot the film as a romantic comedy instead of a crime movie. Ride the Bennifer wave, cash in on all that media attention. So Brest did the reshoots and the budget climbed to $75.6 million. Ben and Jennifer were each getting $12 million. That's $24 million right there just for the two leads. The movie came out and it didn't just bomb, it completely cratered. Dropped 97% the second weekend. Ended up making $7.1 million total. Ben Affleck's career took a serious hit. He said later that this movie nearly sank him and he basically retreated from acting for a while before coming back as a director. But Martin Brest never recovered. He hasn't written, directed, or produced another Hollywood movie since then. It just ended his career. In 1997, the New York Times ran a story about Tim Owens, a guy who went from singing in a Judas Priest tribute band to actually becoming the lead singer of the real Judas Priest. Hollywood studios raced to buy the film rights and Warner Brothers won the bid. Brad Pitt signed on in 1998 but ended up dropping out because of creative differences with the studio. So in May 1999, they hired Mark Wahlberg instead. He was coming off Boogie Nights where he'd gotten a lot of critical praise. He was this hot young star, and since he used to be a rapper, there was even a supposed music connection. Warner decided this whole package was worth way more than it actually was, and paid Wahlberg $20 million. To be fair to Mark, he actually tried. He spent 5 months preparing for the role, worked with a vocal coach, grew his hair out, went to metal shows. He put in the work. But the movie was just crap. It opened against The Musketeer and Soul Survivors, dead on arrival. Made $6 million opening weekend and came in 4th place. It ended up with $19.3 million worldwide, less than Mark Wahlberg's salary. The movie aged terribly, and it's genuinely hard to sit through now. People call it one of the worst movies ever made about the rock scene. Julia Roberts used to be the biggest name in Hollywood. America's Sweetheart, $20 million a picture could open anything. That was 20 years ago. Amazon apparently didn't get the memo. In 2025, they paid her $20 million to star in a psychosexual thriller called After the Hunt. After the Hunt premiered at Venice Film Festival and immediately got destroyed by critics. It ended up with 38% on Rotten Tomatoes. Nobody wanted to see a movie about sexual politics at a university. When it expanded from 6 theaters to over 1,000, it made a pathetic $1,200 per theater. The movie cost somewhere between $70 and $80 million to make, though nobody can figure out where that money went. A year before Anora cost $6 million and was infinitely better. One studio executive told Deadline that the climate isn't welcoming to films that deviate from the franchise formula anymore, that art films need festival miracles and award season momentum. After the Hunt had neither. It ended at $7 million total, which means Roberts' salary alone was almost 3 times what the movie made. This one's different because it was always meant for Netflix. They put together this massive all-star cast, DiCaprio, Jennifer Lawrence, Meryl Streep, a bunch of others, and made it for $75 million. DiCaprio alone got $30 million. Jennifer Lawrence got $25. She even told Vanity Fair she was fine with the pay gap because Leo brings in more box office than I do. Except this time, Leo couldn't bring in any box office. Netflix originally planned to release it in 2020, but the pandemic delayed everything. The movie finally got a limited theatrical release in December 2021 in 500 theaters. 2 weeks later, it hit Netflix. Total theatrical gross was $791,000. But on streaming, it crushed. First week on Netflix, it got 111 million viewing hours. It became the most streamed English-language film on the platform. Got 4 Oscar nominations, didn't win any of them. Director Adam McKay is still mad about all the critics. When it came out, he called the haters utterly ridiculous, and years later, he's still complaining about cultural gatekeepers who hated the movie while the popular response was huge. The thing is, Netflix doesn't care about theatrical numbers. They paid DiCaprio $30 million knowing the movie would make nothing in theaters. They wanted it for the platform, and that's exactly what they got. So in this case, DiCaprio's salary made perfect sense for Netflix's business model, even if the theatrical gross looks embarrassing on paper. The Body had been in development for 15 years. Originally, it was set up at Universal. Liam Neeson was attached to play a Jesuit priest investigating whether archaeologists had found the actual body of Jesus Christ. Universal got nervous about the religious themes and dropped the project. Eventually, the financing came together through a couple of independent companies with a $30 million budget. By this point, Antonio Banderas was hot off Zorro, so they paid him $12 million, a career high for him at the time, to take over the lead role. The movie was terrible. The script was full of forced dialogue, the execution was clumsy, and what could have been an interesting premise just fell completely flat. Word got out and nobody wanted to go see it. Lionsgate picked it up for distribution and gave it a release in 11 theaters, made $36,000 domestically. Overseas, it did slightly better with $3.7 million, but against a $30 million budget, it was a disaster. 15 years in development, and it probably should have stayed there. But Banderas got his $12 million, so at least someone walked away happy. Philippe Martinez had just gotten out of jail in France for fraud. He served 6 months, got out, and somehow convinced British investors to give him $200 million to start a film studio called Bauer Martinez Studios. Martinez had big plans. He claimed he was going to build the biggest independent studio in Hollywood within a year, bigger than Lionsgate, and one of his first moves was paying Richard Gere $10 million to star in The Flock. This was more than double what Gere was getting at the time. They hired Andrew Lau, the director of Infernal Affairs, to make a thriller about a guy who tracks sex offenders. Production wrapped, and then Martinez fired Lau and tried to recut and reshoot the film himself. While he was doing surgery on The Flock, Martinez released 2 other movies, Harsh Times and a Van Wilder sequel. Both flopped. Both cost way more to market than they made back. The Flock was supposed to get a theatrical release through MGM, but Martinez burned that bridge by not paying for prints and advertising on Harsh Times, leaving MGM stuck with the bill. So of course they wanted nothing to do with him after that. Martinez's studio ran out of money. The Flock sat there with no distributor and no marketing budget. Eventually, the Weinstein Company picked it up just for a straight-to-video release in 2008. The movie made $7 million overseas. Sylvester Stallone made Copland in 1997, got great reviews, and everyone thought he was having a career renaissance. So for his follow-up, he chose a thriller called I See You about an FBI agent being stalked by a serial killer. This was part of a 3-picture deal Stallone had signed with Universal back in 1995. The deal guaranteed him $60 million total. For I See You, he was getting $20 million. They shot the movie in 1999 with a $60 million budget. Universal screened it for test audiences, and the response was terrible. They scheduled reshoots and delayed the release. Then things got worse. Ron Howard and Brian Grazer's company Imagine Entertainment had produced the film. After seeing how bad it was, they removed their name from it completely. They were so embarrassed they didn't want to be associated with it. Universal sat on the movie for 3 years, just left it on the shelf collecting dust and interest charges while they figured out what to do with it. In 2000, they pulled out of the entire 3-picture deal with Stallone. I See You was the only film that got made, though Stallone had already collected his $20 million. Eventually, Universal gave up and sold the movie to DEJ Productions, which was basically Blockbuster's distribution arm. They gave it a token theatrical release in 78 theaters. It made $79,000. Overseas markets added another $6 million or so, but it still was the worst box office bomb of Stallone's career.